Hello class, this lecture is going to focus on the basics of Biblical Hebrew textbook chapter 14. So be sure to be following along in your textbook chapter. And what we're going to be looking at is the calperfect weak verbs. So in chapter 13 we looked at the strong verbs, and the pattern for the strong verbs off the katal, katala, katalta, katalt, and so on. In this chapter we're going to be looking at kind of how that pattern plays itself out when you've got those weak verbs that we introduced and talked about in chapter 12. So with this material, there's going to be a lot of those paradigms. You're going to see a lot of words in Hebrew. Don't stress out and don't overthink what's going on within these paradigms. And so you don't have to focus on memorization. If you can memorize that cal-perfect strong verb, katal, katala, katalta, katalt, and so on and so forth. If you can remember that pattern and be able to recognize that pattern, then you can just adjust with these weak stems or these weak roots. So what we're going to see within each one of these, so on the far right, you've got the katal. It's a little bit cut off because of the circle for my lecture head. But you can see the first guttural. This is what it's the pattern that's going to look like with the first guttural, second guttural, and then third chet or ayin. This is the pattern that's going to happen. Now notice that it's almost the exact same, except for those places where there is red. Those red vowels. So you see the hatef vowels, the reduced vowels there under the first guttural, under the 2MP and 2FP, and then under the second guttural with the 3FS and then the 3CP, and then with the third basically guttural, the third chet and the third ayin, you see that it's only under the 2FS that there's a change. Other than that, they're the same, right? So these are very similar. Just notice, so I guess what I would say is if you notice a weak verb, right, it's got particularly a guttural in one of those first, second, or third position, and you see something that's just slightly different, then just think, oh, it's probably just because of that guttural is present, and so it's moving the vowel. So remember things like gutturals prefer A-class vowels, right, and those kinds of things that we talked about from chapter 3 of the textbook. Third aleph is going to be a little bit different. So you're going to have that lengthening of the vowel there. So instead of that pathik or pathak, you're going to have the kamets there in that second, under that second radical. And that's basically just going to be the pattern throughout. Wherever you would have that pathik vowel in the strong verb, you're going to have the kamets in the third aleph. So if you can remember third aleph, you got the kamets instead. That's going to be the big difference between the two. The third hey is the one that's probably the most different, but you've seen what's happened with hey when it ends a word already. It will sometimes turn into a tau, right? And sometimes it'll drop off. So what we're going to see is it's either going to drop off and turn into a tau, or it's going to drop off and turn into a hirik yod. So notice that is the pattern that's happening. And if you remember and notice that that's what's happened kind of throughout our study of Hebrew thus far, then it shouldn't come as that big of a surprise. Now the third hey is a fairly common verbal form. And so you will want to be able to recognize this pretty easily, particularly with like the word haya, which is actually a doubly weak verb. But with the word haya, you're going to see that. Bana, which is right here, to build or to make. This is a pretty common, and haya are very common verbs. So you're going to see it within those two verbs quite frequently. Other types of verbs, we've already talked about geminate verbs. So you see that holam wow vowel letter there in the 2MS, 2FS, 1CS, 2MP, 2FP, and 1CP. So you see that happening with what's going on there. And so one type is going to take that. And then the other type is going to basically do the exact same thing, where it's going to add that holam wow. And then you've also got the dagesh there in that radical, that middle radical, so to speak. So nothing major here. If you just remember geminate verbs and just know the major geminate verbs, for instance, savav is one of the most frequent, if not the most frequent. If you can just remember, okay, well, when I see savav, what I'm going to have is I'm going to have that that dagesh in the middle radical, and then you're going to have the holum wow, and then the rest of it holds true. But notice that the vowel endings on these stays pretty much the same. I mean, the two FS is maybe the biggest difference where you lose the schwa underneath it, but it doesn't really change the pronunciation or anything like that of the word. So you still have the same basic endings on each of these. And the point of what you're trying to get across is to be able to recognize it from the endings. So if you remember the endings from the strong paradigm, right, which is in the far right-hand corner, then you'll be good. So here are some doubly weak patterns. So where you might see a little bit of shift or change. So when you've got like the third hey with a second guttural, so you've got the changing of the vowels, the hirik yod, the hey dropping off. The same thing with the first guttural and the third hey. So you've got the hey turning into a tau and the hirik yod vowel letter. Some reduction of the vowels. Since the first guttural, since a guttural can't take a schwa, you're going to see it take that hetef vowel, the reduced vowel, the hetef pathak there instead. But if you know that it can't take a schwa and you see a hetef pathak underneath it, it's the same basic concept there with the reduced vowel, and then the hirik yod is following the third hey pattern. Biconsonantal, this is when we introduced verbs, we talked about how almost every verb is a triconsonantal verb, but there are some that are biconsonantal, that they are just two consonants. Biconsonantal verbs are classified by their medial vowel letters, and so you see the lexical form of these words is kum, seer, and bow, with the holum wow there in the middle and then the aleph at the end. But when they're in their when they're being conjugated, when they're being brought out when we see them in in all of their forms, we're going to see that middle letter from the lexical form not present, not there. So with the word kum, it's kam, kama, kamta, kamt, right? Kamti, kamu. It's following the same basic-ish pattern, right, as the strong verb, right? You see similar types of things. Maybe you see two kamets instead of a kamet and a patak, but the endings are still the same. So notice that the endings are still basically the same. The lack of an ending in the third masculine singular, right? The ah ending, the ta, the t, the t, the u, the tim, the tin, and the nu endings. All of those endings are the same. And so you should just be able to recognize them. And if you can remember, these are the three of the most common ones, and you can kind of see these here, it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise. So when we think of kind of the cal-perfect verbs, and we're looking at what's going on within the inflection, the inflected forms of these verbs, here's just a recap of some of the more common ones, like the third hey and the geminate. We can see that the same basic pattern is following through. The same basic pattern is following through. You've still got the same endings. You've got the same suffixatives, right? The same suffixes here with this cal-perfect. The cal-perfect is also, remember, called the suffixed ending. It's also called in some modern textbooks the katal verb. So when I learned it as, instead of the perfect, I learned it as the katal verbal form. And perfect and katal means the same thing. It's still talking about the same thing. And remember that the cal katal, we're gonna translate it as simple past. Completed action is the big idea here, but when we translate it most of the time, we're going to do simple past as the translation. So some other high frequency verbs are the verbs nathan. So you've got the third noon there. You're going to have that noon drop off, which we've already seen with like the min that'll attach itself, the min that's going to attach itself to the beginning of words with the min preposition. And haya, to be, as I already mentioned, this is one of the most common verbs, haya. Yara, you see it's like triply weak. It's got the yod, it's got the resh, it's got the aleph, but it doesn't change that much, right? You've got the tsere underneath the the second radical, which is the big difference. But you're gonna kind of expect something like that with a third aleph verb, and so these are very common words: to give, to be, to fear. And then the one on the far right is the word mot or mawat, which is to die. And so mate, matha, mata, mat, mati. So these are moot. Is all of these are very common verbs. So just notice there's not that many differences. All of the endings remain the same. Don't let this freak you out. Don't look at all of those reds there and think that things are drastically changing. They're not drastically changing. So the reason why the endings on the to give are changing is because the noon drops off, and then notice you've got the dagesh. You've got the dagesh in that final position, but you've got that in there because it's the assimilation of the noon is what that's called. So with that, before you move on, just if you know the strong verb paradigm, you'll be in good shape. Right? The katal, katala, katalta, katalt, katalti, katalu, kataltim, kataltin, katalnu. If you know that pattern and you know the endings on it, the endings remain the same kind of throughout. Then just look at those ones that occur the most frequently, be able to recognize them when you see them in a sentence, and then just match them up. And if something strange is going on, notice and just pay attention to whether it's a weak verb, right? And it's got a weak consonant in one of those radical positions. And when I say radical, I just mean like the first, second, or third position. A radical is the same thing as a character or letter. All right, so let's then move on to the vocabulary, and we've seen these within kind of the paradigms. Haya, to live. Haya, to live, and then notice the PL and the hifil are the definitions for those are there as well, so you can just pay attention to those. Look at the differences between the cal, which is the Q, and the PL, which is just to the PI there, and the hifil, which is the HI. Yakol, which is to be able, the ability to do something, to be capable. Karat, which is to cut. This is often used with the word barit. So karat barit is to like cut a covenant. So like let's cut a deal. That's cut a covenant or make a covenant. Sewer, to turn aside. Maybe you could remember like I don't want to go into the sewer, so I turned aside. Anything you can do to help you remember words is helpful. Avad, to work. We already saw the word, I think we've already seen the word eved, which is the word for servant. So the word avad, having the same root, is to work, to serve, to toil. Ana, to answer, to respond. And the nifil, you notice the nifal, you notice that you got the passive to be answered. Ozen, ear. Isle, ram. So there was an isle caught in the thicket, right, by its horns. Zevach, sacrifice. Chaim, life. Maybe you've heard like a prayer, l'chaim, right, l'chaim or something like that. Life. Tzedakah, righteousness. Tzafon is north or northern. Az, then, since or before. Af is also, or indeed. Gibor, strong, mighty, valiant, can mean hero. So a Gibor Hachayil, I think I already mentioned, is like a mighty man of valor. Gideon is referred to in Judges chapter 6 by the angel of the Lord as a Gibor Hachayil, right? Pen, lest or otherwise. Notice the makef there. And that is the vocabulary for this week. So I pray that this was helpful. Don't let this overwhelm you. Again, if you know that basic strong verb pattern, you'll be in good shape. Now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of his Holy Spirit be with you all. Go in his peace.